Hey everyone, welcome back. This is your host AZ, and today I had a wonderful conversation with Kelsey Bailey, and this is part 2 of a several part series that includes members that are either employees or contractors with South Metro Fire. Kelsey Bailey is a performance dietitian, and she spent over 7 years in special operations with the 10th Special Forces Group, and she's currently a consulting dietitian with the Colorado Rockies, the Colorado Avalanche, and Lakewood Police Department, in addition to South Metro Fire. Kelsey and I had a great conversation. I know you're going to enjoy it. As always, please give me a rating and share the podcasts with someone you know. Thank you for joining me on the Fire Rescue Wellness Podcast. I'm your host, AZ. I find the research and resources and then provide the fire service with the so what, now what, to ensure the health and well-being of every member of our profession. Together, let's thrive. I'll fix it.
Perfect.
Okay, listeners, welcome to the Fire Rescue Wellness Podcast. Today, I am with my friend, badass dietitian, Kelsey Bailey. Kelsey, welcome to the show and say hello.
Thank you so much. Hello, listeners.
I have been looking forward to having Kelsey for a really long time. And interestingly enough, listeners, this is part 2 of, I'm affectionately calling it the South Metro Badassery. Because last week you heard from Chris Macklin. This week you're going to hear from Kelsey, and then we have a few more people coming up. So, Kelsey, I think you've listened to at least one episode, so you probably know the format. So the first question I'm going to ask you is basically, who is Kelsey Bailey?
Yes, yeah. Thank you for inviting me on and for having me. I'm a performance dietitian for my little LLC. Her name is B.Well. She was a dream for a long time and now is my reality. But I was with special operations for 8 years prior to that, so have been in the tactical space for a little under a decade. But from Western Kansas, live in Colorado, Midwest girl at heart, but love the mountains.
Well, and Kelsey, I think you're being a little bit like, I feel like you should brag on it a little bit more. You were the performance dietitian for 10th group, right?
Yes, for 10th Special Forces Group. Yep. And then currently in my role with B.Well, I function with South Metro Fire, with Lakewood Police, the Colorado Rockies, and the Colorado Avalanche.
She's just casually doing it all. That's incredible.
Yeah, maybe jack of all trades, master of none of them. I'm not sure which is which.
No, I think you're probably master of all of them. All right, so now we know who you are. Kelsey, what sets your soul on fire?
Helping others, I would say. I was thinking about some of the questions you've asked former guests and really why I do the work that I do and why I feel so passionate about it is I get to come into work every day and be grossly humbled by the people that I work with, which is the greatest gift I could possibly ask for. So everybody else gets to sleep easier at night because of the work that our first responders and that our military do for our communities. And so I find it to be my greatest honor to be their support while they're supporting our communities.
That's such a good answer. I just got to let that sink in for a second. Also, I'm picturing Jack Nicholson. You want me on that wall. You need me on that wall. Kelsey keeps us on the wall.
Yeah.
I like that. Kelsey, this is a bad habit that I've been doing lately. I end up going on a tangent during the 3 questions. I think, unless I was hallucinating, I'm pretty sure that I saw some pictures of you on social media not so long ago with my favorite scientist, Abby Smith Ryan. Is that fact or did I make that up?
That is fact.
Tell me about what you were doing in
also
DC.
My idol.
I know, Abby's the best. Okay, tell me what you were doing in DC.
Her. I think she's amazing.
She's amazing.
She was with Dr. Stacy Sims, so I felt like I was just dying with admiration. I am unworthy. But we went with a supplement company, had funded kind of a lobbying group, and it really is to get better access to care. For the point of it all was better access to care for women in the military, but also women in general. And so there were 3 kind of pillars of health and research and military, looking at what are we doing? Where are there pitfalls? Where is there just gross gaps that exist? and how are we working to attenuate those gaps? And so I was truly so humbled. The biggest amount of imposter syndrome I've ever had in working with, men for a bulk of my career, but having this gross passion for women and women's health, kind of tagging right alongside that. So it really was a huge opportunity to get good advocacy work. And what I love about it is that it hasn't stopped. Sometimes there's events like that and you're like, great momentum. This is awesome. We really want to see change. And then it kind of fizzles out. But just a few weeks ago, Jill Biden and Marie Shriver were in the White House getting the Women's Health Initiative signed for increased funding for women's health. And so really when it feels like the big rock, big hill, those are my favorite passion projects. Like, just get me into the work. Let's start pushing. So that was the event that I was with her at.
So listeners, you might not have ever considered this, but there has not been a lot of research done on females. In fact, many studies don't include females at all because historically the researchers have said, well, it's just too hard to control for the menstrual cycle. And granted, maybe, yes, but our mutual friend, Abby Smith-Ryan, has basically put her tiny foot down and said, enough. We need to do research on women, for women, focusing on women. And she is incredible. And hopefully she's going to be on the show pretty soon. Kelsey, if you can kind of nudge her too.
Perfect.
I've been working on Abby for a while. Okay.
She also, just an interesting aside of what you said, she's also teaching other research institutions how to do research on women appropriately. Yes. So that answer of like, it's too hard is no longer acceptable when there's people who are willing to coach you through it.
Yeah, not a valid excuse. Oh, here we go. More rabbit holes. We'll get to the third question eventually. Perfect. But, I had some researchers on maybe about 4 or 5 months ago. They do research on textiles and specifically on firefighting gear. And what they have heard for the longest time is it's just not, quote unquote, worth it to worry about female patterns, the female form, whatever, because there's such a small percentage in the fire service. And so I just love that Meredith and Cassandra were like, that's enough of that bullshit too. Mm-hmm. So advocacy is important. So
important. And same thing with like military gear, like body armor is not designed for the female body. And that increases your risk, your liability, your health, your safety.
Yeah, your risk of injury. Absolutely. All right, let's get to the third question. Kelsey, we pretty much already answered it, but how are you changing the world?
I feel like I'm just not even worthy to answer this question, but I like to think that I'm doing it in like the best way that I know how, which is maybe with the person right in front of me, if I'm sitting down with a client, and or on the bigger scale, what are we doing to actually move the space forward? And that's where I really have a heart for some of the advocacy work and educating other professionals, especially dietitians, in this space to like, let's level up. Let's bring everyone's education where it needs to be. If you want to jump into the fire service, if you want to jump into police, let's understand what is unique about these communities, what we can bring to the table as dietitians, and really, again, give that support to the people who are constantly working in our communities because they so deserve it.
Outstanding. Absolutely outstanding. So you are currently a contractor with South Metro.
Correct.
And so tell me, what does that look like? How do you work with their personnel in general? We'll get to like, what should our firefighters be doing specifically later, but how do you work with South Metro's personnel?
Such a good question, because it's morphed over time. So I really started baby consulting with them in 2018, and it was occasionally like the wellness program, athletic trainers, if someone was in rehab or there was an individual of concern, then we would get a referral. And so it started off kind of grassrooty that way. And then earlier this year, I was sitting down with Macklin and Nick Bartley, who's my direct supervisor. And we were like, if we're going to do this, we've got to do it. If we want to show what this model can actually look like in the way that we know it in the military to look like, we got to do it. We just got to jump. And so really since February, we started bringing in some of the bigger initiatives that I see as bringing value into an organization. And that's integration with the rehabilitation process. That's integration into, are we prepped for our annual METS test? That's integration into annual physicals and working with our embedded doc of what are the best things that we should be testing? How are we communicating on them? Not only clinical norms, but performance norms. Are they actually internalizing the idea of a tactical athlete? So talking to the line in that way, how are we best supporting you for the job you need to do and at home? And so we've kind of brought in some fun initiatives throughout the year. We've designed a rehab kit for rehab to help get folks back, just a little bit quicker back onto service, and maybe a little bit better hydrated and a little bit better fueled back onto service. And we're working on some like hydroponic farms at one of the stations where they're growing their own greens and growing their own herbs, and have some, lofty goals with stuff like that. But I think that looking at that big picture of, it's almost like a dietetic internship where you're like, we have our community work and here's what we're doing in our community. And here's what we're doing in ways that we can support educating children that come through the fire station about healthy eating. And then we have our performance, which is, we have our diving teams and we have our wildland teams and we have our folks that do more stuff in mountain work, and how are we educating them on the performance on the actual job? And then we have the clinical side. We obviously know cardiovascular disease and cancer are issues, but also hormonal health, and how are we addressing those appropriately? So I think about the dietitian's role as kind of like that same dietetic internship. That's why they exposed us to it all, because there's so many aspects of nutrition that hit all these different areas. So that's always my goal. So I would say we're still in the growing phase, but it's been unbelievably rewarding of a process thus far this year.
And if I remember correctly, I think Chris said you have around, is it 800 firefighters? Is that correct?
Line members, yep.
800 line members. And so, Kelsey, is your role primarily educating them in, say, groups and with handouts, or are you really striving to meet these people one-on-one, or does it just depend?
It's a total mix, actually. And I think in a good way, and maybe an organic way, where we integrate into different ways. So I can go to the stations and do education at the kitchen table, which is probably the most fun. Obviously the one-on-ones, especially with one-on-ones, I always welcome family members to participate. So if there's a spouse that's involved, I always joke that you shouldn't be eating by yourself. Ideally, that'd be sad. So we like to bring in family members to make sure that message is hitting how it would fit for the whole family. So those kind of tag team both, but in more of like group dissemination of information, we kind of integrate into training in different ways. So we had a fire cycle earlier this year where we introduced the rehab kit. So in those types of instances, all the line members are going through those trainings. So you interact with everybody in that setting as they come through. Kind of the same thing with annual physicals, especially next year, we're revamping how we're doing it, but we'll be sitting down face to face with every single one, myself, a doc, our PA, reviewing all the lab work. What does that mean? So in those ways, you get to see everyone individually, which is not realistic, for the entire year, but is a really great touch point for at least a yearly check-in with all the line members.
And Kelsey, you mentioned, if I heard you correctly, you're a performance dietitian, correct?
Yes. Yeah. Sports dietitian, performance. Sports dietitian. In tactical, we usually say performance because it's a little bit more appropriate for our type of job.
Okay. And I obviously know what that means, but a department, an agency, or a listener might not know what is the difference between a sports dietitian or performance dietitian and, say, the dietitian you see in the hospital once you get a diagnosis of, say, diabetes or something like that. What's the difference and why is it important?
It's the best question. First, I guess I would say that for most of the jobs, at least military-wise, and hopefully we'll be setting the standard for fire moving forward, is that there's a credential that's needed for that, which is a certified specialist in sports dietetics. So it's additional hours that you have to log. It's an additional credentialing exam you have to get. So that brings in the sport and performance, I would say, baseline knowledge required for a performance dietitian. What I think is really unique about tactical is I always joke it's like sports on crack, because you often don't know your environment. It's going to be way less controlled on timing and duration, and potentially what the mission set might be, whether that's you're going to a fire call, you're having to sprint down a perpetrator, you're going on a mission set in the military. So that will, all of those things change what the performance necessary for the job looks like. And I often joke that performance might be that aspect of the job, what people think is like the cool part, sexy part. But it also might be, are you at your desk for a huge portion of the day and you're having to maintain focus? That's a part of your job. That's a part of how you have to perform for your work. So how are we helping you support that? And in that includes reduction of long-term disease, because that keeps you on the job longer. That gets you back to work more quickly after an injury. So I think about performance nutrition as hitting a lot of those different aspects. And again, and uniquely for tactical is the sleep and stress. We have to consider those. And beyond additional training that a lot of us have received, that's not going to be, that's like on the job training. A lot of it you learn as you go. But our professional organization, the Collegiate and Professional Sports Dietetic Association, created a special interest group this year specifically for tactical dietitians for that reason. What additional education do we need to make sure that we're able to serve those who are serving us as best as we possibly can?
I feel like there should be a whole unit of extra education on how to interface with the weirdness at the firehouse. Kelsey, how did you, I mean, you came from the military, so you had some semblance of probably what you were walking into, but we're a weird animal. How did you sort of assimilate into the weirdness?
Honestly, I think it's funny because the old adage, like, you're never a prophet in your own home, right? So in the military, it was cool if I was doing work for professional sport. In fire, it's cool if you've done work in the military. So there was some of that like grandfathered acceptance, I suppose, that I came in with. But I think so much of it is social and situational awareness as part of it, understanding where you fit. And that's a hard one to teach. I've had interns my entire career and I love them, but it's a hard one to teach. And then also a willingness to put yourself in their shoes, and a humbleness in saying, I know my job, but I want to learn from your job. And that was always my approach in any training I did, military or fire, is that willingness to be like, this is my opportunity to be grossly humbled in whatever type of random training you'd like to put me through. So we did a maze training for one of our fire cycles this year. So I got fitted for my SCBA and put on all the gear and put on the blinder and got uncomfortable just like they would need to, so that I can put myself in their shoes and really try to relate to how does nutrition fit? What makes sense to integrate? What on these pieces of advice where they're like, yeah, I'm never going to do that. It doesn't fit. It doesn't make sense. So I like to see those as opportunities of like just learning how to do the job a little bit better.
And how'd you do in the maze, Kelsey?
I was so stressed out.
Were you stressed out? Yeah.
I have such bad claustrophobia. And so it's a good I have my cognitive performance person with us, and I've worked with them long enough to know the rehearsals to do cognitively. But it always is a nice, humbling experience to feel stuck, to feel uncomfortable, like clearing the wires above your head and coaching on the swim. And I'm like sweating profusely. So it was good.
Well, you brought up an interesting point, and I've had a couple of dietitians previously on the podcast, both Megan Lautz and Maureen Stockline, and they brought up
idols.
Aren't they great?
So
They're
good.
Such nice ladies. But they brought up the same point, which is we don't know when the performance, quote unquote, our performance is. For example, I work in a mildly busy department. I would say we run on average out of my station 10 and 12 calls a day, maybe 15. But last shift when I was working, we had not one, not two, but 3 general alarms for a call of a structure fire. Now, all 3, 1, 2, 3, turned out to be nothing. 2 of them were heater malfunctions, and one of them was someone saw through a window. The house was under construction, and they had a salamander heater in there to keep it warm, and they saw the flames, quote unquote, through the window. So it was 0 fires. Yeah. But in theory, we could have been first in on 3 structure fires. So with that information, Kelsey, how do you start to educate your firefighters on fueling? I mean, how do you even start?
Yeah, I think about the reserve. So in those instances, it's unrealistic we're going to get a full recovery. And so what's our reserve? What's our foundation that we're banking on for times of not perfect nutrition or not ideal timing of nutrients? What are we relying back on? And any dietitian ever probably that you'll talk to will say that always goes back to energy availability, carbohydrate availability. What are you doing? Just what are we doing day in and day out with the meals and snacks? Do we have enough reserves? As if gas tank, so to speak, of carbohydrates is half full, third full, and we're trying to pull on stores to fight an actual fire that's intensely carbohydrate demanding. And in a world of, I always say carbs have a really bad marketing manager. They need some help on that, but really understanding before those events happen, the risk that you're putting to yourself and to your team if you're not well fueled. And I think when we reframe it as you become a liability for your team, sometimes that can increase motivation on actually paying more attention to it in the day-to-day life. South Metro's schedule is a little different than some other departments as I'm learning, but they do 48s. And so that 4 days is a huge opportunity to look at how am I refilling that gas tank? How am I refueling? Knowing that there could be subsequent back-to-back calls where I'm going to need to be on. But I'm a huge advocate too, and this is part of our design of these rehab kits, and I think that they can kind of morph into other things further. But what do we keep on the rig? What do we have available coming on site for those scenes? What's going to be easily digestible, almost like the throw and go? Like how can I throw it into my mouth and keep going on with my day? But really equipping not only the rigs, but the stations with the appropriate materials needed to best refuel quickly and rehydrate quickly to keep people a little bit more safe on all more intense calls, I would say.
So let's table the refuel and rehydrate for 1 second. I'm writing it down because we're coming back to it.
Put a pin in it.
Put a pin in it. Let's talk about basic. What should I be doing? What should our firefighters be doing on a baseline level every day just to make sure that they're where they need to be in terms of protein intake, carbohydrates, fats, basics. Let's talk basics, and I'll write the pin down so we don't forget.
Yeah. Keep eating. It's my motto. Keep eating.
I love it.
When in doubt, keep eating. I guess that's such a loaded question because I'm sure, again, any dietitian would be like, it depends. But it does. It would depend on what that training volume looks like. Sometimes people are training for things in the outside world, outside of just their job. But like baseline normal recommendations, all humans ever, are we eating 80% of our food from real whole food? Do we know what it looks like? Can we read the ingredients on the label? Is that 80% of the time knowing? 20% of the time, send it. We're going to need to have something that is a more convenient food item. We're going to need something that is a more packaged or more processed food item, or those are likely going to be incorporated into the day in some form or fashion. Even protein powder is considered an ultra processed food item. So I think it's clearing out verbiage, but really going back to are we eating real food? Does it require a laundry list of ingredients, or can we easily identify what it is on our plate? And then we build accordingly for performance. So sometimes like the easy go back to is the USOPC's athletes plates. With the low, moderate, and high training volumes, we start education from the plate out, looking at periodizing nutrition. If it's a lighter day, we don't need a huge amount of carbohydrates. If it's a higher volume day, we might need more. If we don't know what kind of day it is, we better play safe in the middle. And then on our off days, we can titrate down if we need to. But really, I joke that if it's good enough for Olympic athletes, it's probably good enough for firefighters to start there, at least from their athlete plates, which are really a helpful visual.
I really like that. And I think the important thing that you just said, and I want to restate it in case somebody had a mini seizure, a TIA, is that we don't know. So let's start somewhere in the middle. And I do like the ISSN position stand on tactical athlete fueling. What they said is, we don't know, but maybe let's start where a healthy, active adult would start in terms of their calories, protein, carbohydrates, and fats. And then, as Kelsey said, titrate from there.
Yeah.
So Megan, our mutual friend, she says something that I love, which is if you get a protein in a plant at every meal, you're doing better than like 90% of the population. And so how, as our firefighters are going to the grocery store and they're trying to figure out what to make for their shift, how can they sort of in the back of their mind go protein, plant, and build around that? What advice could you give them with that?
Yeah, I have a very similar kind of, I call it like an equation that you think about for your mealtime. So we start with a protein. Portion size of that pretty much always stays the same. We add in 2 colors. If you got green, can you get red? If you got orange, can you get purple? Just 2 colors, take away the stress of whatever else. For a lot of meals at my personal house, it's chopping up spinach and peppers and putting it into ground beef, putting it into our chicken, adding in nutrient density without changing the whole framework of the meal. So yes. 2 colors. We add in some sort of complex carbohydrate based off of the training day, and then we make it taste good. How are we incorporating fat? How are we incorporating flavors, herbs, spices to make it taste good so that it's not chicken and brown rice and broccoli and chicken and brown rice and broccoli forever and for always, but looking at increasing our nutrient density across each mealtime. And then the last one that I've added more recently is how do we make it fresh? So can we elevate? Can we put fresh herbs on top? Are we going to help chelate some heavy metals that we're being exposed to through some increased herb incorporation into our mealtime? So cilantro is a great example of higher exposure to heavy metal, especially in our law enforcement populations. That can help chelate some heavy metals and help with their excretion. So looking at how are we utilizing our food strategically to help all the things that we need to do that relate back to work, but understanding their why. Because yeah, it's like fun and cool, and I guess maybe makes your food taste good. It makes it feel a little more elevated if we have that aspect. But really the purpose of what does it matter for your work? How does it bring in for your life? So that's always the equation I go back to. Protein, 2 colors, complex carb, some sort of starch. Make it taste good. Make it fresh.
All right. Quiz time, Kelsey.
Yeah.
What's your protein? We're putting together a meal. Protein,
okay,
go.
My protein is, I'll do what we did last night. We had ground beef.
Okay. 2 colors.
We had spinach and peppers chopped in.
Okay. Complex carb.
We had tacos, so it was corn tortillas.
Sweet. What did you put on it to make it taste good? Please say avocado.
Avocado and cheese.
Oh, queen. And then I bet you're fresh. Was it cilantro?
Yeah, for that particular meal, yeah.
I love it. This is so good because you could literally put this on a tiny index card, laminate it, and stick it in their pocket. And they can go to the grocery store and go protein, 2 colors, complex carb, something to make it taste good, something to make it fresh.
Yeah. And it helps like in the meal planning for the week as a family as well. If you can sit down and say, what do we have in the freezer? Okay, let's plan our proteins. We got that covered. What do we have in the fridge? Is it farmer's market time? Is there fresh abundance on fruit and veg? Or let's see what's in season and more affordable right now. So it really allows for a lot of flexibility in planning. I think where sometimes people get hung up, especially probably Megan and Maureen are both like, meal plans. When people get a meal plan, it's just like they feel so locked in and lose that creativity on how do we build a meal that my family likes, that is part of my culture, is part of our social situation, like the beautiful part about food, but really making it accessible. And we've tried to do that at South Metro too. I created kind of like a recipe Google Sheets that all the stations have access to. So if they're like stuck and they don't know what to do for a mealtime, they can go in and kind of click on one of those. I have my modifications that if it's a recipe from online, what do I modify with it? Do my kids like it? Meaning people at the station probably like it.
Yes, children.
So that's been helpful, and hopefully like generating some ideas and getting people to think more creatively outside the box and stuff that they actually have the skills to do. It just is a matter of helping reframe it in a way that feels digestible. No pun intended.
So good. Well, and the thing is with meal plans, people ask me for meal plans all the time. And my first answer is like, I'm not a dietitian. I cannot give you a meal plan, but please, can you just give me some ideas? Well, you're not going to learn anything,
right?
Because if the meal plan says, whatever, hamburger, spinach, blah, 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 and you haven't learned what Kelsey just taught us, after you're sick of eating what the meal plan said to eat, you're back at Pizza Hut.
Yeah. You follow it for a week and then you're done. Bored.
Yeah, because
I'm bored.
It's effing boring.
Yeah.
Kelsey, this is pure gold. Like we could drop the mic right now, but I don't want to because we want to keep talking about more. So we put a pin in refueling and rehydrating. And you mentioned what's available in the stations and what's available on the trucks. Tell me more about that.
I think I see this as a huge area of opportunity in fire. And as we started to design these rehab kits, basically just like a higher sodium formula, a little snack item to help as you're bringing heart rate down post a more challenging training or event. But how are we actually bringing this into where it probably needs to be, which is on the rigs, in the stations? Let's be doing preventative work or prophylactic care to help offset some bigger instances of dehydration post a training and bigger instances of inadequate fueling, especially like from a carbohydrate perspective. Do we have things like waffles or goos or chews or gels or whatever it might be that people like, but something that can easily be tossed in knowing like, oh, I'm on my way to a big call. Like we got to get going. Or we have even a big training coming up. Am I fueled for the type of work I'm being asked to, of pulling hose or throwing ladders? These are intensely demanding trainings and calls that people can go on. So looking at how do we reframe that? And I think it's interesting when you compare against some of like the military resources. So we have like the MREs, or in the special operations community, they have a commercial off the shelf list where they're able to order specific items that are meant for training. Things like protein drinks and like your goos and chews and gels and hydration packets. And looking at how do we bring that same idea into fire? Because what's hard is that it puts an increased cost on the individual for sure. And I know there's always conversations on budget. And so it's looking at what's the why behind it. And we know that, what is it, like 80-90% of firefighters are coming into any training that they go into dehydrated. It's like, are we getting maximally what we want out of that training if we're coming in deficient? And I think there's a time and a place for purposeful training in a not ideally fueled state, but the bulk of our training should not be done in a compromised state of fueling and hydration, because we want to try and optimize adaptation that we're looking to get. And I know that's so much of your passion and work is like, let's train appropriately for what we're actually being demanded to do and making sure we're being smart about it. And so I see that as a big opportunity. I wouldn't say we have it quite figured out yet, but we're playing around with different ideas and these little like pelican cases that get like shoved into a drawer somewhere. Or, I don't know. We're still trying to figure it out exactly right. But getting the products where the people are, I know is a huge aspect of importance in that. And the feedback from the crews was just abundant of, we would love this in the station. We would love this on the rig, because I would like to be doing this work ahead of time. Like I want to be doing that preload and postload of electrolytes and fuel. So yeah, we're still in the process, I think, of developing that. But from what I can understand, and I'm a baby into fire, so I hesitate to say that I know much of the whole landscape. But I couldn't find anything that existed quite yet of like, do we have a framework of what that looks like, or what we would even recommend? Right now, we're going based off of sport, and we're kind of going based off of military research. Basically, we just know that firefighters show up to most trainings dehydrated, but what's the best for them? So we're kind of pulling from other entities to fill in the gaps.
Are you using a specific brand of oral rehydration, or is it kind of whatever the contract got renewed for?
Yeah, I'm not married to any one brand. So ones that we utilized a lot in the military was Drip Drop. Costco has the Liquid IV. Scratch Labs has one called Wellness that is a higher sodium formula. The Right Stuff is a higher sodium formula. So any of those have a combination of the carbohydrate and electrolyte. And a lot of times it's like, what fits the budget? What do people prefer? And stuff like that. So,
and what tastes good?
Yeah, exactly. What are people actually going to drink? How much chirping is Kelsey going to get about carbohydrates being present in things?
I love listeners. You can't see it, but Kelsey was like with her fingers doing the chirping bird.
Chirp,
it
chirp,
was
chirp.
So good.
Chirp, chirp, chirp.
Well, I am retiring in about 4 months now, which is super exciting.
So exciting.
And my department has finally realized that, oh, she's really leaving. We should maybe like utilize her for some lectures. Like I haven't done lectures for years now.
Mm-hmm.
And they're like, we should utilize her for some lectures. And one of the big things that everyone always wants to talk about is nutrition. And so I'm just developing a lecture kind of based on the ISSN position stand basics. But I did a survey prior to the lecture asking people, what do they want to know about nutrition? And it was, questions like when to eat, how much to eat, blah, blah, blah. And one of the things that I asked was, I know exactly what to eat. I just don't want to. I'm not motivated to do so. That was a click box. And like 90% of people clicked the box. I was like, holy shit. How do we get past? Because here's the thing. We're sleep deprived. We're traumatized. We eat for comfort. We eat for the like family experience. And sometimes we just don't give a royal flying crap. How do we break through that motivation part, Kelsey? The mic is yours.
Yeah, it's such a phenomenal question to ask, and in framing it that way and giving that as a checkbox, because my initial answer before you said we're sleep deprived and stressed is that's the why.
Mm-hmm.
What's the why of like, and that's the general population as a whole is most people. I'm not like trying to convince most individuals that vegetables and fruit should be incorporated into an appropriate diet, or protein should be incorporated, and dairies, as long as you tolerate it, can be great. And most people understand that that's a thing with regard to eating more healthfully. But if we don't understand the social situation, if we don't understand the nature of the job, if we don't understand culture, if we don't understand financial constraints, cooking skills even, it's like for deaf ears. We're falling on deaf ears. So with those, I always try to go back to what has the biggest string to pull for people's heartstrings of motivation, if you will. Mm-hmm. And on that, what I found at least that resonates a lot in the male population, and in my time of military and initial time here in fire, is talking about hormonal health. I think is like a big one that people are constantly wanting to talk about. And food is a enormous contributor to that. And so if we don't eat enough, you can bet your bottom that the priority is not going to be reproduction. The priority is going to be survival. And when we can talk to people about those things, some of those little groundworks can over time be that reminder, and then figuring out how do we fit it into the environment. Dr. Joyce did such wonderful work in her research in Oklahoma with just setting out fresh fruit and vegetables and nuts and seeds, and increase goes up of all these healthful food items just by having them around. It's the same thing of like the kind lady down the street who baked you a cake because she's so grateful, but like just because it's around, like, oh yeah, I might as well eat it. So it's what's in front of you is what will be consumed. So I think that looking at it from so many different angles is really the best way to address. But I think with stress and sleep, people know that this is a more stressful job. They know it's more sleep deprivation. What I like to focus on with those is how is nutrition either supporting that, or how is nutrition making both of those things worse? And or what's the connection between it all? So when we're sleep deprived and we're stressed, we're already in a higher sympathetic state. We're already going to crave more carbohydrate. We're already going to look for a pick-me-up from a stimulant. And then that cycle can continue. So where is that break-in point? And that may be different for each individual. Is it, hey, we have this ritual of, my favorite for all listeners, all sleep is tart cherry juice and Greek yogurt and magnesium in the 2 hours prior to bedtime, help with sleep quality, sleep quantity. But can we integrate something like that? That it's not such a high dose of any one of those things that it makes it difficult to wake up on a night call, but it can help with better quality when we're able to get the sleep we can. So looking at little integrations, and I'm a huge supporter of looking at adaptogen support in that as well. And just figuring out where's the break-in. Because I think, for everybody, it's so different, but oftentimes that hormone piece can be a big motivator for a lot of the males. As soon as you say the word testosterone, people come running.
That's kind of the pain point I push on too with sleep. I give them that statistic from that big study at University of Chicago, and they're like, oh. So Kelsey, you said the word adaptogens, and I'm not sure all of my listeners even know what that means. So can you kind of take us down that path a little bit? What exactly is an adaptogen?
Yeah, so in utilization of those in my nutrition practice, I look at some of the herbal support that exists, especially as it relates to calming down some of the sympathetic nervous system and supporting lessened anxiety and lessened depressive symptoms. And things like ashwagandha is kind of an easy herb, if you will, that people tend to tolerate really well. Obviously, with any sort of supplementation, you want to look at third-party verification. Where is it coming from? Is it a reputable company? Stuff like that. Rhodiola is another one, Rhodiola rosea, that I really like in utilizing in this population. They can be really helpful with sleep. If we're really dialed up, a lot of rumination of thought prior to bedtime, or you're constantly waking up and you're running through that to-do list in your head, that's one area that we can focus on to help bring support in congruence with this when I'm a part of this multiple disciplinary team, that we have cognitive performance to come in with the nutrition support at the same time. And we have neurofeedback to also come in and dive in. We're so lucky with the resources that exist at South Metro, but really approaching it from multiple avenues. And I think that even if you don't have all of those resources, looking at strategically, what can I be doing to kind of like give myself a leg up, knowing I'm not going to change the job, nor do I want to. There's so many beautiful reasons why people who tolerate fight or flight better are really, really great at the work. But looking at how do we help them dial down, especially on their off days, and have we been up on calls all night and then we're doubling down to like a super challenging workout. But looking at that nervous system, I think, is such a huge, huge aspect of this work as a whole. And adaptogen support from ashwagandha and rhodiola are my favorite, but doesn't mean they're the only ones. There's mushrooms that can function as adaptogens as well. And looking at you could do a whole hour-long lecture of adaptogens, which I'm hoping to do in the new year at South Metro.
I think Kelsey just booked herself for a second appearance. So you mentioned do you work still with some private clients?
Mm-hmm. I do. Yep.
And can you work with people that do not live in the state of Colorado?
Yes. Yep.
You can.
Yes.
So if one of my listeners their interest is piqued and they say, man, I think I really need to work with a dietitian, and I'm just like picking up what Kelsey's laying down, would messaging you on social media be the best way to get a hold of you, or how do we contact Kelsey?
Yeah, the easiest way, I am self-admittedly, I mean, Megan is just, she sets the bar on social media to such a high degree that I feel so, and I suck at it is the baseline. Basically because I don't give enough of my brain attention to it. But the best way to reach me is likely through the website, or I'm at B.Well Colorado on Instagram. I have a hard time putting like so much nutrition information because every time I type something out, I'm like, ooh, but it depends for this population and this population. So I struggle with that a little bit. But my website is also B.Well Colorado, just B, the letter B, and then Well Colorado at bwellcolorado.com. So those are the easiest ways to get a hold of me. But yeah, I think that as a whole too, Megan, Diana Wynn, I came in on the 11th hour of editing for the new firefighter resource that CPSDA put out. So that's a huge one with what can nutrition do in this space. For our tactical interest group for the dietitians, we created a 10 reasons to hire a dietitian or to bring on board a dietitian. What can we bring value add to an organization? So I think that those are huge things, especially in departments thinking like, yeah, this sounds great, but like, what, how do we even do this? Like a lot of things that got said to me when I first started was like, what are we, a spa? And I said, maybe we should start reframing, not a spa, but like reframing what taking care of yourself looks like and putting priority on keeping people retained in the job and getting people back to duty quicker and reducing insurance costs. And dietitians can play a huge role in all those different aspects of support for a department.
Well, I've been saying for probably 4 years now. So the timeline has now moved to 6 years from now. So 4 years ago, I said within a decade, every department of any substantial size within the United States will have an embedded professional. So mark my words, within 6 years, most departments of any size will have an embedded professional. And we're starting to see it. I mean, Oklahoma City Fire just put out I don't love what they did with the job because they're hiring an athletic trainer, which I think is fantastic. That's a great first hire, but they're asking them to be a health and wellness coordinator. Mm-hmm. So they want them to be able to talk about nutrition and sleep and exercise and lead academy classes. And it's a lot right. for an athletic trainer. But Oklahoma City Fire is going to have an embedded professional. And I keep hearing these little murmurings of these jobs. So things are turning around.
So good. And
it is good.
It feels cool. I mean, I feel like I'm coming in maybe a little later to the party than some of the people who have really laid the groundwork. But so grateful for that and so grateful for the momentum because the care, again, is so deserved. And I think that same struggle has been had in so many professional and collegiate and tactical areas of whose role is what and who can't you just talk about everything? And I think there's something to be said about what does appropriate referral look like, even if that person isn't necessarily embedded, but being able to comment intelligently on like, hey, here, I know the strength coaches have these offerings. I know athletic training has these offerings. That's not my area of expertise, but like, let's get you connected. I think is a really, a direction that we can all go. I don't want to know all the things. As a dietitian, I don't want to know all the answers. I want to be able to appropriately refer to people who are so much smarter than me in different areas, and especially when I feel beyond my scope. So I think that the same thing can be said with any embedded asset, and especially reaching out to other professionals who are trying to elevate the space as well.
Yeah. So good. 6 more years, Kelsey.
6 more years.
All right. I always talk, I didn't ask you before the podcast, but I always like to talk about dogs. Do you have any?
No, but my youngest child is obsessed.
Oh, tell me more. Obsessed. How old is your youngest?
It's almost 2.
2. Okay. Do you see yourself getting a family dog anytime soon?
At some point, for sure.
Okay.
My husband and I both travel a bit, which makes having a dog a hair more challenging. But yeah, we definitely want a dog. Yeah, the littlest one. We had to take Good Dog Carl to school today.
Really?
The book.
Well, here's my thing. I was obsessed also at around that same age. I was probably 18 months old, and my grandpa came to visit us, and he wanted to take me for a walk. And my mom knew how obsessed I was with dogs. And so she said to him, listen, like, the only rule is do not let her pet strange dogs. Okay? My grandpa's like, okay. And we came back from the walk. I was super excited. Mommy, I got to pet a dog. And my mom was like, what the hell happened? And my grandpa's like, well, I had to let her because she said, pat that strange dog, Grandpa. I had to let her. She asked.
That's exactly my youngest. He will sprint after other dogs at the park.
Yeah. So
just
you
had beeline away from mom and dad and just sprinting away.
You probably just better get your own dog, Kelsey. Okay. I can help you pick it out if you'd like.
That's so sweet.
Big fan of the bully breeds. So
yeah. They're all I love dogs, grew up with them, and yeah, well, eventually we'll satisfy that tiny human's little desire to have a dog.
Okay, thank you. Because otherwise my heart's going to hurt.
So good.
All right, Kelsey, this has been such a great conversation, and I'm so glad you booked yourself for a second appearance. We'll get that on the books.
I'll get my brush up on my slides of adaptogens. More so, maybe we can do gut health. That's probably a bigger passion area of mine in this space.
Okay, we can have the South Metro series, and then we can have the Kelsey Bailey Dietetics series. Yikes. We got many series going on now. All right, listeners, thank you for joining us. I'm going to put all of Kelsey's contact information in the show notes. Kelsey, this has been such a pleasure. And with that, we're going to drop the mic. AZ and Kelsey are officially out.
Thank you.
Okay, Annette and Kelsey are back. We aren't quite done. We had to say something else. Kelsey, say it again about food quality. Say it again.
What you put in is what you can expect to get out.
Tell me more.
Your body is like a car, and type of fuel matters. So if we're trying to put diesel into an engine, it may not run that effectively. So 100% when we think about all the different food items that we bring in and whether they're causing more inflammation or reducing it, what we put in is what we can expect to get out. And one great analogy, I think it was on the Ready State podcast, was if you were told at 16, you're going to get one car for your entire life, how many times would you take it in for an oil change? How nice would you keep the outside? What type of fuel would you put in? Would you put the gas pedal down all the way? Or would you drive it really safely, knowing this was the only car you're going to get your whole life? And our bodies are the same. I mean, obviously on a higher stakes level, but we tend to treat them so differently because we don't have that same mindset with regard to its longevity.
Have the same reverence for your body as you would have for a car you have to drive your entire life.
Oh, that's so good.
So good. Okay, now we're officially out.
Yeah, take the foot off the gas pedal sometimes too, everybody. Let that nervous system recover.
I love it. Kelsey and Annette are finished.
Over and out.
Over and out.